Alan Payne. You spent 31 years in the movie rental business and 25 of those years as a Blockbuster retail franchisee. You stay open even 8 years after Blockbuster went bankrupt. And now you're sharing your story of the Blockbuster demise with your book, Build to Fail, the inside story of Blockbuster's inevitable bust. Alan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here to talk about this.
So, Alan, this is an example that people use all the time. You know, Blockbuster versus Netflix. Blockbuster couldn't adapt fast enough to the new technologies and the new taste of consumers. And it doesn't go any farther than that tagline. It's just as well as people use the tagline of Kodak versus the digital camera, but we really don't know the story. So you wrote a book that has been missing from the business shelf for many years. So thank you so much for writing this book.
It was great. It was a great experience. It took me about 3 years to do it. We got it done.
And 31 years of living the experience. So it's not something that you are just collecting from random sources. You were there from the beginning to end. So that makes it even more valuable. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, I don't know if you stumbled onto this kind of business, or of course you stumbled because it didn't exist when you were going to school, but tell us about how do you stumble upon the business of movie rentals?
I got into it through kind of, I think, non-traditional means, and that may be what is a big reason why I did it different than a lot of other people. I learned it when I was working for a grocery company back in the 80s. If you remember, the video business started back in the mid 1980s, and at that time, grocery stores were a major component of that. About a fourth of the business was done through grocery stores and these little video departments. So I learned it there, and the name of that grocery company, most of your listeners probably have not heard of it, but it's a company called HEB. They're based in Texas. They're a $27 billion company. They're privately held. That's why you probably haven't heard of them, but they are the market leader in all of Texas except Dallas, and that's only because they're not there, and they're going there now. But they decided in 1986 to open freestanding video stores. So we were not just doing stores inside of supermarkets. We were doing freestanding stores that competed directly with Blockbuster. They looked much like a Blockbuster, but the business model was just completely different. And that's where I learned the business. I ran those stores for HEB. And when they decided to sell them in 1993, I left and joined a Blockbuster franchise group. That's how I got involved with Blockbuster. So I didn't come through a traditional means. And then a few years after that, the company that owned those stores decided to sell them. And that was in 1999 when the business was starting to have some difficulties. And I got an opportunity to buy those stores. So I had never raised money. I'm not an entrepreneur at heart. I don't like to put things at risk. You know, I'm not the kind that would go mortgage my house to start a business. But I raised $16 million to buy those stores. And that was, you know, kind of the year that things were starting to go south for Blockbuster, but we ran it totally differently. And over the course of the next 7 years, we tripled the profit of the company. And that's what enabled us to ride out the difficult years and lasted 8 years beyond Blockbuster's bankruptcy filing. Wow. So that's kind of the long and short of it.
And when you were working at this store, I already forgot the name, but what was your role? Were you in some kind of administrative role?
I was a store manager.
Right.
You know, I was the HEB was a real progressive chain, very competitive. Didn't, you know, it was an attitude of we will be the best. We will not be beaten by anybody. And it was led by Charles Butt, who still runs the company. And I'll tell you, HEB is widely regarded as the best grocery company in the country and one of the best retailers of any kind in the country. If you go look them up, you'll see all kinds of documentation about all the awards they've received over the years. That's where I learned retailing. In an ultra competitive, we're going to be the best kind of environment. And Blockbuster, because of how they were founded and how they grew so fast and were so successful so fast, they never took on the culture of someone that had to be good at anything. They just wanted to be biggest and fastest. They thought that was good enough. And it was only about 6 or 7 years into the business, they started to find out that being biggest was not good enough. And they struggled, they never figured it out. Wow. In fact, you were talking a while ago that people assume that the Netflix that we know today is what did in Blockbuster. Well, Netflix didn't start streaming movies until 2007. And by that time, Blockbusters was a financially broken company. It had been broken by all kinds of things other than the internet.
Right.
And that's a long story behind that, but that's what the book is all about.
Right. Alan, just to stay a little bit longer upon your own particular story. So you went from being a store manager to then the manager of this video rental business, to now risking your capital and your experience and everything you have in order to buy these stores. So what I'm trying to get is that the American dream is still alive. I mean, there's an opportunity for someone to go from a store manager to investor or entrepreneurs and see a business flourish. And it's just that I have a hard time accepting the idea that there is no income mobility, that, once you are born poor, you are deemed to be poor for the rest of your life. Or if you don't go to a Ivy School university, you are deemed to not have opportunities in your life. And I keep on running into stories like yours that, you're a store manager and all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, you, with a lot of work and determination and vision, you managed to flourish.
Yeah, I didn't come from a background that would have ensured this at all. I did go to college, but I grew up in a very, very small town in Texas and was not exposed to successful business people. I didn't know what that was. And I was fortunate to be with a company that just defined excellence. So I learned business from them. And then instead of spotting an opportunity of a new business, I learned the business I was in, which became the video rental business, later. So that's how in the franchise business, you hear those stories a lot. There's a lot of McDonald's franchisees out there that started flipping hamburgers, and they started at the bottom, learned the business, and then found some money or got somebody to back them and bought their own restaurant. There's thousands of those kind of stories out there. It's not, and that's what's beautiful about the franchise business, is because you're in a business where the business model has been proven up. If you can learn how to do it better than everybody else, you'll eventually have an opportunity to own it. And there's thousands of those kind of examples in the franchise business. The unique thing about the Blockbuster thing, and the reason I lasted so long, is I had learned the business somewhere else. And once I got in Blockbuster, I found out they really didn't know much about what they were doing. So I ran my company completely different than Blockbuster. And that's what enabled us to survive so long.
Right.
But you're right. Starting a business is not about recognizing an opportunity that somebody doesn't see and then jumping all over it. Sometimes it's just getting involved in it and be better at it than everybody else, and you'll get your opportunities.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for contributing to this dream. I hate to see the dream being dismissed, and I continue finding examples like yours. Okay, so let's go back.
I'll say it's not just hard work either. It's got to be smart work.
Yes,
You know, you
yes.
can't just go work your butt off and expect to find success. You've got to be smarter than everybody else. You got to learn it more than everybody else.
Right, but just the idea that it's possible if you
Sure.
work hard and you're smart and you know you focus, it's not a pipe dream.
Of course not. Of course not.
Fantastic. Okay, so now then let's go back to the story of Blockbuster. So it was opened in 1985 by David Cook. Can you tell us a little bit from that vision of David Cook opening that first?
Well, it actually goes back to 1985. Even before that, that's when he opened his first store in Dallas.
Okay.
And to better understand how all this came about and why it became the industry it did, is that, you know, the VCR, the video cassette recorder, had been introduced in the late 1970s, and by the early 80s, studios had started putting out movies on video cassette, but they wanted to sell them for about $100 a piece, and so a bunch of entrepreneurs started, you know, most people weren't willing to pay that amount for a movie. So that's what actually began the video rental business. And people started going, okay, people are not going to buy them for that price, so we'll rent them.
Right.
Well, the studios sued them. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that the VCR was legal, by only a 5-4 vote. It almost wasn't even a business. And when the VCR became legal, then the studios tried to pass a law through Congress to ban video rental. That failed too. So all through the 80s, you've got people getting into a business that they didn't even know was going to be legal. And that's kind of why it was a really kind of a fragmented business that was built from a bunch of entrepreneurs, many of whom were undercapitalized, hadn't really been in business for themselves, just saw an opportunity. It's a case of a classic entrepreneur. But what happened is that we have a multi-billion-dollar business that's been created by 1985, and but it's not a very well-run business. And that's when David Cook, who actually opened the first Blockbuster store in Dallas in 1985, saw this opportunity to create a store that was family friendly and good locations, brightly lit, fun to go in, families could go there, and it was a comfortable place to be. It exploded, and it grew so fast that he needed more money to keep it growing, and failed in an attempt at a secondary offering. It was actually a public company. And that's when Wayne Heiser stepped in and bought 60% of the company for only $18.5 million in 1986. And there was about 50 stores open at the time. Wow. And that was it. And so then David Cook left. They didn't see eye to eye on how to grow the business. David Cook left. Wayne Heiser becomes chairman and CEO of Blockbuster, and kind of the rest is history. Within 7 years, they've opened 3,000 stores, and it's a $3+ billion company. Wow! And they dominate the industry.
So you mentioned Wayne Heiser. He
Yes.
is also a powerhouse. He has built 3 Fortune 500 companies, one of them from scratch, the other ones, like in early development. So this is another hero of entrepreneurship, you may say. I mean, with his faults, I mean, he's not perfect, but this is an amazing record that he has.
Yeah, there's no question that Wayne Heiser is one of the great entrepreneurs in the history of this country. He started waste management with one garbage truck, and today it is still the largest waste company in the world. He started Blockbuster after he sold Blockbuster to Viacom in 1994. He founded AutoNation, and through acquisitions, built that into the largest auto dealership in the country, and it still is. Wayne Heiser, and people may remember the owner of the Miami Dolphins, the owner of the Florida Marlins baseball team, the Florida Panthers hockey team. He was a classic entrepreneur, but the thing that he didn't do very well is really dig into the details of the businesses that he owned. And that was the culture of Blockbuster. They were so successful by just opening stores faster than everybody else that they never really understand the business in any level of detail. And, you know, I guess it's a classic example of a visionary founder that, in this case, it was not the case with Waste Management and with AutoNation. They're still huge, successful companies. In the case of Blockbuster, he never transitioned from founder-led to a great operator and running the company. And there was plenty of time after he left to get the company fixed and in that mode, but it never happened. They went through another 4 CEOs by the time they had filed bankruptcy, and all of them struggled.
And could you tell me why did he sell to Viacom?
Well, we don't know for sure, but
the money was good though.
Yeah, he sold it. Yeah, he put $18.5 million in it and sold it for $8.4 billion. So 7 years after he bought it. Now, of course, he didn't own 60% of it then, because he had gone through so many more stock sales. His take out of that sale was about $600 million. But you know, to his credit, he made enormous wealth for thousands of people through the process of that. I forget what was the quote. Where are we going with that? What was the question?
Why? My question was, why did he sell? And
I think he got a price offer from Viacom, who really wanted the business for its cash flow that he just couldn't refuse.
Right.
And the stores were starting to, the growth had slowed. Some of the other businesses that he had gotten into had not done well. There was a Blockbuster Music. People may remember Discovery Zone, which was a kids' playland. There were Blockbuster amphitheaters. He even bought land in Florida to create Blockbuster land that was going to compete directly with Disney World.
Wow.
So he had aspirations of this media conglomerate, but everything that he bought into beyond the Blockbuster video stores was not going very well, especially the music business, which was competing with Tower Records and Sound Warehouse, if people remember those companies from years ago. It was not going well. So I think he just saw an opportunity to cash out. And you know, in retrospect, the company that Blockbuster became a part of was Viacom. Well, Viacom was a cable television company. And people remember Nickelodeon and MTV. Those were Viacom networks. And in the process of buying Blockbuster, they also bought Paramount Pictures, which they still own. So Blockbuster became a part of this giant entertainment conglomerate that on paper looked like it ought to work. But in reality, Blockbuster declined steeply every year thereafter, after that. Just 3 or 4 years after Blockbuster had been acquired by Viacom, they were having a financial difficulty.
Well, it's my impression that Viacom had wanted to use Blockbuster as a cash cow and just drain cash every year and not give it an opportunity to grow or to compete or to adapt to new circumstances.
Yeah, well, they as Sumner Redstone said it at the time. He said we needed cash, and Blockbuster had it. I think as a part of the acquisition, they got about $2 billion in cash that Blockbuster had at the time. And then the whole idea was that Blockbuster was going to throw off at least $500,000 or so more of cash every year. And that was free cash flow. That was after opening all the hundreds of stores they were opening every year. And what happened is that they ran into some competition in the mid-90s that in the form of Hollywood Video that really sent them into a tailspin. So as analysts saw it at the time, Wall Street analysts, Viacom acquired Blockbuster for the cash, but the cash never happened. It started declining very quickly. And the best illustration of that is when Viacom spun off Blockbuster back to the public market as a freestanding company in 1999, it was valued at $2.5 billion. So that's a 60% decline in just 5 years. So that's what happened. And that was all because the cash flow never happened. I mean, they were a profitable company, but nothing like Viacom thought it was buying.
Right. And could you take us to the instance where Blockbuster refuses or declined to buy Netflix? What was the scenario? Was Netflix going into some kind of a struggle at that time?
You got to put all this in context. Netflix started in 1997. And they started as a company that was that the whole idea is that because DVDs were beginning to take over the business, before DVDs, it was VHS cassettes, which were not efficiently mailed through the mail. So Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, who are the founders of Netflix, came up with this idea of, since DVDs are so light and small, they can easily be mailed. Let's start an internet business where we mail DVDs to people instead of them having to go to a store. They eventually came around to the subscription model, and that was groundbreaking at the time. And that was in 1998, 1999, when they converted the business from a traditional rental and sell business over the internet to a subscription business model. Sales exploded. They had already raised about $100 million, but they were running out of money because the company was growing so fast. And if you remember, that was in the dot-com bubble when it burst. The financial markets had frozen. So Netflix started trying to get Blockbuster as a partner. They met with John Antiaco and his group in September of 2000 and offered to sell Netflix to Blockbuster for $50 million. And Reed Hastings would stay on with the company to run the internet business. So Blockbuster had an opportunity to partner with Reed Hastings, who arguably is maybe the most powerful person in the entertainment industry now, and certainly the most transformative. They had an opportunity to partner with Reed Hastings and his group for $50 million, and they just dismissed it. The discussion didn't last very long. They never saw the financials. They left, and that was in 2000. Netflix eventually did an IPO, and I think it was 2002. The company at that time was valued, I think, at around $100 million, and kind of the rest is history. Wow. Netflix kind of wrote the rules from that point forward as to what the rental business was going to be about.
Okay, well, spoiler alerts for the listeners. Okay. Blockbuster went bankrupt.
Yeah, no kidding.
But okay, Alan, let me ask you. So how come you stayed for so long after Blockbuster was bankrupt? I mean, it was no longer a big player. How do you manage to stay in a declining industry?
I would say that, to preface that, don't ever assume that the people that dominate a business know what they're doing, because I always found Blockbuster to be struggling to understand what the business was all about. We ran a completely different business than they did. If you look at the years from the time that Blockbuster turned down Netflix, that was in 2000. to 2007, when the CEO at the time, John Antiaco, left the company, and in my opinion was virtually gone, dead at the time. They would file bankruptcy 3 years later, but my opinion is that Blockbuster was a financially broken company when he left in 2007. During the 7-year time frame, we tripled the profits of our company. Blockbuster's stock fell 80% during that same time period. Because of that, they didn't have access to any capital. And they really, you know, they were just hanging on for dear life, and finally filed bankruptcy in 2010. So, I mean, we could go into all the details of what we did differently, but that's probably too long a story for this interview. But we ran a completely different business. So by the time Blockbuster filed bankruptcy in 2010, we were still a strong company. We were not weak. We became weaker as time went on, and eventually closed our last store 8 years later. But, you know, my belief is that had Blockbuster, if we not been fighting all the negative images of Blockbuster through those years, we'd still have a handful of stores open today. It is obviously in many respects an archaic business but a lot of retailers have survived, and had Blockbuster done things differently, I think there's a market out there for going to a rental store, and a lot of people would laugh at that, but believe me, I've heard a lot of people talk about how they miss it, you know, and had it been done differently, I think there could still be a few today.
Right. My ex-girlfriend and I, after days of hard work, we were brain dead, and we would go to the Blockbuster store and get a movie and drink a glass of wine and unwind. And, you know, sometimes we were upset that it took us so long to choose a movie because we would argue among ourselves.
Yeah. Well, but that was part of the fun.
It was
fun. And you'd be standing there and listen to other people have the same arguments, and it was an experience to go to in our stores on a Friday night. It was not unusual to go in there and be 300-400 people in there.
Wow.
And all there for the same thing. So the experience of doing that, and all these employees that were also into it, you know, it was a fun thing to do.
Right. Okay. So the last question is, what inspired you to write this book? You were living there, from the beginning to the end, last man standing, and then you said, okay, I guess I had to tell the story. Is that how it went?
I started thinking about it a couple of years before we closed the last store, and just through a whole lot of, I knew I wanted to tell it, but I wasn't going to do it unless I could figure out a way that I thought it would come across right. But the main thing that drove me to do it is I really got tired of hearing, oh, Blockbuster went away because of Netflix. There was so much more to the story, and you really had to go back to the beginning to understand how Blockbuster was founded, the culture that was developed, and how they were not able to adapt to all the various challenges that came along. It wasn't just Netflix; it was other video stores, it was Walmart, it was grocery stores, it was Netflix, and later on it was Redbox. There was all kinds of challenges that Blockbuster faced along the way beyond what Netflix was. And the Netflix that we know today didn't exist for the majority of that time. The Netflix was a DVD renter, just like Blockbuster was. Netflix used what they learned renting DVDs to build the largest entertainment company in the world now, in Netflix. So Blockbuster was a bigger renter of DVDs, yet they weren't able to successfully make that transition. There's all kinds of lessons to be learned from that. And I really wanted to tell the complete story instead of they're just this persistent narrative. Oh yeah, Blockbuster failed because they didn't transition to streaming. There's so much more to the story than that. And that's what this book is.
Well, I had to congratulate you. You tell the story in a very engaging way, and you take us right from the beginning from the time that even having a VCR was illegal or was
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
make
yeah,
illegal unto
yeah.
our present day. So it's an amazing story. I recommend for the listeners to go and check out your book. Alan, can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where can people follow you if they so wish?
Yeah, the title of the book is Built to Fail, the inside story of Blockbuster's inevitable bust. It's available, of course, at Amazon. It's available in digital Kindle there, as well as paperback, hardcover. And it's any place that online books are sold. So
Alan, thank you so much for your time.
you're welcome. Thank you.